Good afternoon. Once again, we're excited to have all of you with us here in the chapel on Zoom, and we certainly welcome those of you who might watch the video later on after Clint has an opportunity to post it on YouTube. We've been looking this week at E.F. Hutton and Samuel as our biblical character. And as we have pointed out on the three previous days, E.F. Hutton was the stockbroker who, when he spoke, everyone listened. That was their commercials. That was the message they wanted to get across, is that this E.F. Hutton had something to say that people would want to listen to. And so we've been tracking that theme all week and looking at the life of Samuel, the prophet, and how he exemplified that very law of E.F. Hutton, if you will. And so to refresh your memory, or maybe this is the first time you've had a chance to join us this week, the law of E.F. Hutton basically says that when the real leader speaks, people listen. And I think all of us know from personal experience how true that really is. And so today we start with our leadership thought for the day, as we always do. And here we're moving to the issue of character. For our thought for today says this: character, the character of the leader underlies the content of the message. They are congruent. If the character is strong, the message will be heeded. If the character is perceived to not be strong, the message will either be rebelled against or simply ignored. So keep in mind the proportional relationship between character and the impact of the message. So that's what this is saying. So by way of introduction, I love the scripture because it's just so powerful, it's so practical, and it's so true. In Matthew 12:34, where it says, "For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." And that's so true. Sometimes we can try to keep a lid on things, maybe not tell something, but you know, that heart just gets so full of something, and it just comes out. You really find that out when the first time, go back to when you were young and the first significant other that you had, or that you had a crush on, and you think about how often, and maybe we forget because it's been so long now, but how often that person's name seemed to come up in every conversation, no matter what the subject matter was, but that person's name came up in the conversation. Why? Because our mind and our heart was there, and it was out of that abundance the mouth spoke. And it still remains true that whatever is in here deep within is just crying to get out, and our voice is the mechanism to allow that to happen. So out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So John Maxwell says this on page 72, the 21 most powerful minutes in a leader's day. I hope several of you have picked that book up. Great leaders have integrity. Anyone who displays inconsistency of character will not remain a voice of influence in the lives of others. When you look at the life of Samuel, you see that consistency. Two things come shining through: character and competence. He lived according to his values and practiced solid leadership without wavering. And people listened to him as a result. You go back in the biblical story, and I'm reminded of Eli's sons, who were noted as people who did not have good character, and notice that they completely evaporate from the scene. We don't even hear about them. Of course, they had perished because of a prophecy, but the point is that they had no influence, no leadership at all, even though they were the sons of the top dog, shall we say, the guy in charge, yet they wielded no influence because their character was deficient. And here was Samuel, who at the time was a young boy, who began over the course of time, because his character was strong, that meant that the words that came out of his mouth were powerful and people wanted to know what Samuel thought. So character is the bedrock, it's the foundation to building influence. And so what we want to focus the majority of our time today on is the subject of gaining credibility. For a leader, having credibility means everything, because if you don't have credibility, no one will follow. And so pretty important for a leader to have followers. And so gaining credibility is the way to accomplish that. So as a prerequisite to becoming an E.F. Hutton, and wouldn't we all kind of like that? You know, people thought so much of what we had to say that even people in other conversations would stop their own conversation to hear what you had to say. Yeah, that would kind of stroke the ego just a little bit, I think. But as a prerequisite, as I was saying, to becoming an E.F. Hutton, make sure that you're seeking influence for the right reason first. Not for your ego's sake, not for personal gain. And then after you got the motive question down first, then make sure to adhere to these following points that we'll list for you and then unpack in just a moment. First, and how important this very first one, they're all important, but this first one I think is really so incredibly important. You must live the message first. You must live it first. Secondly, you must be more than the messenger. Third, your message must be more than a message. And then finally, you must have a stake in the outcome. So let's visit these 4 points a little bit more in depth. You must live the message first. Why? Because the effectiveness of your message relies more on the character of the messenger, that's what we've just been talking about, than it does on the content of the message. Perhaps you've heard this quote. I've heard it several times. Maybe you have too. Your character speaks so loudly, I can hardly hear what you have to say. Ooh. that can hurt a little bit, but no, seriously, we have to pay attention to that. Because I think it's a really impactful statement. So let me share it again. Your character speaks so loudly that I can't hear what you have to say. It's pretty powerful. So at Saul's coronation, jumping back into Samuel, 1 Samuel 12, 2-5 has this passage. Samuel challenged the people to declare if he had treated them unfairly in any way or had cheated any of them. They all responded by stating that Samuel had neither treated any of them unfairly, nor had he cheated any of them in any way. So in other words, Samuel is modeling this consistent character, and people acknowledge that, and that explains why he had so much influence. So you must live the message first. Secondly, you're not just a messenger. You are a messenger, but you need to be more than that. And the reason is because it's not about you owning the message as much as it is about the message owning you. So before your message will convince anybody else, it must first convince you. And not just up here in your head, but in here in your heart. All visions are born of the heart, not of the head. The strategy for working them out, that's a head thing, but the vision is a heart thing. And so this, well, you want to refer to this as the message owning you, or the message convincing you at the heart level. What that does, it allows you to convey your message with passion. That will in turn allow you to convince others with your message. I've seen people, and in my world, especially before coming to the hospital, it was preaching. And so I would hear some preachers deliver a message in a very monotone, very unenthusiastic way. And I would hear others, though, who you could tell their heart was in it. And that was not only applied to preaching, but really any kind of public communication. Truth is, messages that are delivered with heart as well as content. Now, you can't have heart instead of content. They got to have both. But, you know, I've also discovered that content without heart is pretty boring. And it doesn't capture my attention, let alone my own heart. And so this sense of the message owning you, it becomes a part of you and you can't get away from it. And so that's what allows you to speak with passion about what's on your heart. And that is what allows you to convince others. So not only must you be more than a messenger, but your message must be more than a message. You see, the power of E.F. Hutton is that his message contains life-changing potential, rather than just simply perpetuating the status quo. Go back to Samuel. At the time of Saul's coronation, and again, this was the time when Samuel was about to lose influence, at least in a civil and a military sense. He was giving up control to Saul. But Samuel delivered a message on this very occasion when he could have been wrapped up completely in himself and what he was about to lose. Instead, he still remains focused on the people. And he gives them an incredibly life-changing, at least potential, message. Because what he told them is that, okay, here we are, you now have a king. If you choose to obey the Lord and serve him, he will still bless you. Despite the fact that they were disobedient and asking for the king in the first place, but if following this coronation of Saul, and Saul takes his authority and he assumes his position, if at that point they would choose to obey the Lord would in turn bless them. But if instead Samuel says, but if you choose instead to rebel against the Lord, then he would oppose them. So he presents to them this, here's choice A, choice B. Talk about life-changing. Whichever way they decided was going to change their lives one way or the other. So you see, Samuel's message was powerful and people listened to it because the implications of it were incredibly strong and life-changing. So, every person, imagine you being there. You were there and you heard that message in person. Every single person who heard that message that day was faced with a decision, weren't they? A life-altering decision that not only on this occasion had personal implications, but it also had national implications. This was going to affect not just people on an individual level, but the entire corporate body and the entire nation of Israel was being basically presented with a decision, and an incredibly important one at that. That brings us to our final point for today. You must have a stake in the outcome. Now that's S-T-A-K-E and not S-T-E-A-K. That would be a little different implication. So people will know whether or not a person has a S-T-A-K-E in the outcome of his or her message. They know, they can just instinctively tell. They want to listen to a fellow participant rather than a spectator who is not impacted by his or her own message. In other words, if the person presenting the message hasn't bought in, why should anybody else? So what is a key difference between a good leader and a great one? A good leader, get this contrast, a good leader sends his team into battle, but a great leader leads them there. He literally, or she literally, has skin in the game. Makes all the difference in the world. It's easy to be an armchair quarterback and just tell people what to do, but when you lead them there yourself, they know they're in it, and I'm following them. So, by way of our conclusion today, to bring this plane to a landing, to be a credible leader, you must make your life match your message. The key word there is congruence. There must be congruence between your words and your life. If your character is inconsistent with your communication, it underlies the reality that you're a phony. In contrast, if your character is consistent with your communication, it underlies what you have to say, and it makes everyone want to listen. There's E.F. Hutton. Everyone wants to listen. Before I go to the question for reflection, isn't there a huge difference between people who are forced to listen and people who want to, who do it of their own free will? I think that's a rhetorical question, if there ever was one. So our question for reflection today: does your character complement your message? Does your character complement your message? We look forward to tomorrow, day 5. As you know, on Fridays, we start 2 hours early. And so we'll be here in the chapel at 1:30 rather than 3:30 to wrap up our week studying E.F. Hutton and Samuel as a model of a person who delivered messages that people wanted to hear. So we look forward to seeing you then, and certainly ask God's blessing on you for the remainder of this day and throughout the rest of this week. God bless you. We look forward to seeing you on Friday tomorrow at 1:30. Take care.